While some of us are highly, perhaps even to a geeky extent, interested in provincial politics, barely half the eligible voters in Ontario made their mark in the last provincial election. Youth, recent immigrants, and Indigenous peoples are often among the groups seen as less engaged than the #OnPoly nerds among us. Joining us now on how to boost engagement and voter turnout, Lance Kopagog. He's a former deputy youth chief, Beausoleil First Nation, also sits on the Premier's Council on Youth Opportunities. Mike Morden, research director of Samara Canada. Seher Shafiq, member of the leadership team at the Canadian Muslim Vote. Frederic Dombrowski, outreach and stakeholder manager at Civics. And Martin Regcon, Ontario politics columnist at the Toronto Star. Martin, I don't know what you and I are doing here. We are clearly in the wrong generation to be participating, but I want to thank the rest of you for coming in and allowing us to partake in this discussion. Mike, to you first. We apparently, in Ontario, have the worst voting record in provincial elections in the whole country. Why?
It's a really good question. I think we should pause on that fact at first. I don't know that Ontarians know that. We know that Ontarians are less likely to show up to provincial elections than federal ones, but we do kind of rank, depending on how you measure it, 9th out of 10 or 10th out of 10 in voter turnout over the course of the last 50 years. Part of that is just interest in provincial politics. So, for example, the comparative provincial election study ran surveys in the event of each provincial election over the last number of years and found that Ontarians rank 10th out of 10 in interest in provincial politics. Part of it has to do with a lack of an Ontarian provincial identity, a sense of embeddedness in this province.
We don't have that same identity that Quebecers have or
That's
Albertans have. We just don't. That's true.
That's right. And I think it's worth emphasizing again, it's not inevitable that our engagement in provincial elections should be less than our federal engagement. It's not true for most provinces. So we're unique in this respect.
Frederic, let's just go through a little comparison here. It's not that we don't like politics. Apparently, let's just take 2011, for example. There were two elections in 2011, a federal election in which 70% of us voted, which is not bad, and a provincial election in which fewer than half of us voted.
Yeah.
Now, I don't get this because the big issues that really touch our lives are provincial. Healthcare, education, social justice, social assistance, highways, everything. Help us understand this. Why?
I think there's two sides to it. The first one being, especially for youth, federal politics tend to be a bit sexier. It's what you see across media. It's what we are faced with every day. It's the first thing you will see when you open your Twitter feed. And it's also in relationship with other countries. We're obviously very affected by what's happening south of the border in the United States. And so youth will tend to gravitate towards that because these are the figures that they recognize and that they can identify with. The other side of it is actually quite simple. Students and youth in general don't really understand the difference between different levels of government. So sometimes they won't even know that provincial government is responsible for education and healthcare. However, once you start identifying and clearly differentiating what each level of government does, students will tend to have a better understanding and more of an interest towards provincial politics because they do realize that day to day, they spend their entire days in schools.
Okay, but the name of your group is Civics, and civics is what we learn in school.
Yes.
So how do we not know the difference between what the city does, what the province does, and what the feds do?
So that's a complex question. Civics is sometimes a half credit in schools across Ontario, which means that it's a half semester. So a winter semester, for example, will be split between careers and civics. And oftentimes now civics is taught as an online course that students can do over the summer rather than do with a professor and with engaging their community.
So it feels like a bit of a throwaway in some respects.
It can be, which is what we're trying to combat by working directly with educators.
Seher, I appreciate the fact that in the last federal election, there was a youthful, attractive candidate leading the Liberal Party, which may have got youthful, attractive young people more interested in politics, and he had a policy to legalize marijuana, which may have been of particular interest to young people. But that aside, how else do you account for the fact that we don't show up, for provincial elections the way we do for federal elections?
Well, I think you have to look at the different populations that are voting and what the voting rates are like. So, for example, with Canadian Muslim Vote, now this is a federal example, but we did some research and we found that in the 2011 election, the Canadian Muslim population only voted at a rate of around 35 to 45%, which is well below the national average of 61%. Now, obviously, provincial voter turnout is lower across the board, so you can hypothesize that for a community who has traditionally lower voter turnouts, the same would be true for the provincial election. And there's a lot of barriers for different communities who have a difficult time, either staying engaged, being educated and aware of the issues that are facing them, and even just simply going out to vote.
Well, Campaign Research did some campaign research on this, as you might expect. Sheldon, let's bring this up. This is Board 3. Why don't immigrants in Ontario vote? Picking up on what Seher just had to say. 64% of immigrants who have been in Canada for 5 to 8 years say they didn't vote because they weren't registered to vote. 16% of them say the parties don't reflect their views or their opinions. 11% say they just don't trust politicians. 9% said they just don't like politics, compared to 17% of those born in Canada, incidentally. 5% said they were too busy. 13% of those born in Canada say that. Martin, let me get you to pick up on some of those numbers. I suppose at some level those are all reasonable justifications for not showing up to vote, except that this stuff's important.
Well, a couple of things though. Let's deconstruct that. 64, roughly 2/3 of people not born in Canada believed they weren't registered to vote. Almost certainly they were wrong about that assumption, because the likelihood is that they were eligible to vote and could have voted if they had presented themselves, were sworn, and had initiated some registration formalities. But the fact that so many immigrants wrongly believe, and so many Canadians and so many young people, because we see that also for young people, believe that they're not allowed to vote, is a challenge, but it's also an enormous opportunity. It means that these are people who in the case of immigrants, new Canadians, are actually quite motivated to vote, because the numbers you just showed, Steve, suggest that they actually are more interested and are more engaged than Canadian-born voters. So the bad news is that they're not voting. The good news is they can be easily, not just coaxed, they're already motivated. Where there is a will, we just need to show them the way, and it can be done.
Well, Seher, I've heard you say in the past that you think some are afraid to vote. Why would that be? Some immigrants are afraid to vote.
Yeah, it depends on the country. So for example, anecdotally, what we found in our community work in 2015, if there were people who came from countries where democracy was the norm, they were more likely to be engaged and not fearful of the system. However, in cases where there are immigrants who have recently come here and they are coming from a place where they could not trust their government, or there was a fear of authorities, even something as simple as receiving a robocall from a political party could be something to be fearful about. Like, how did they get my phone number? How do they know who I am? It's when you have that distrust, when you've grown up with that in the country of your origin, sometimes that can present some barriers, and we really try to overcome those barriers by presenting, celebrity endorsements, people who are recognizable in the community, to kind of dispel some of those myths and get engagement going.
Like who?
Like Nazem Kadri from the Toronto Maple Leafs.
He's in trouble these days. Are you sure you want him? You sure he's been suspended for 3 games?
I don't follow.
Well, okay, you don't follow hockey.
Okay.
But I do.
So another example would be Zaib Sheikh from, he used to star in Little Mosque on the Prairie,
sure.
the CBC show. And Rabia Khader. I mean, there's a number of examples, and we have some fresh faces this year as well. But just touching on the point about why people don't vote, before Canadian Muslim Vote started, before we even created our branding and anything, and we had done the research on low voter turnout, the very first thing that we did is we actually asked the community why. And so we put forward a survey, and we asked, did you vote in the last election? If not, why? Why not? And what we found is that A, people didn't know who to vote for. B, they didn't think, they didn't understand the political process. And C, they felt disconnected from the issues that were being raised. Those are the top 3 reasons.
Pick up on more of these things as we go through. Lance, did you vote in the last election? Oh, I should have asked, are you old enough to vote?
No, I'm not.
You're not old enough to vote. Okay, so you're off the hook then.
Yeah, I just turned 17.
So you got a little while to wait.
Yeah.
You can't vote in this election yet either.
No.
No, you're going to have to wait till the next one.
Yes.
We're told most Indigenous people in this province don't vote. Why is that?
Well, I think that there's a general distrust of government. And, that goes back when you look at the history of, colonialism and, what the government did to Indigenous people. So I think that in a lot of communities, people don't really, they don't really know what the parties offer them. And, and in the case of the Progressive Conservative Party, the party isn't offering anything. And, when you talk about Indigenous people and participating in these kinds of elections, you need to, really understand, like I said, is that there's that distrust there, and they don't know what the motives of a government are. And, I think that it all comes down to distrust.
Lance, would it matter if Indigenous communities around Ontario were told, look, the legislature just voted in 2 new ridings in the northern part of this province, one of them with a significant Indigenous population there, virtually guaranteeing there will be an Indigenous person elected to the next Ontario legislature. Would that matter at all in terms of encouraging people to come out and vote?
I think in those specific ridings it would matter, but province-wide I don't think it would matter to Indigenous people in the communities, about Ontario politics.
Okay, let's...
Can I just jump in
please.
on that one point about, because there's a special burden that we bear in Ontario, because there is this double democratic deficit that you spoke about in terms of a reasonable turnout at the federal level, about 71% in that 2011 election, versus roughly half in Ontario. And so there's this paradox that, yes, Ontarians tend not to get that excited about provincial politics compared to Quebec, for example. We know that. The paradox is that Ontario is the second most powerful government in the country. It is huge. And you mentioned a few topics, but in terms of young people, tuition rates, school funding in high schools, cell phone contracts are regulated by the government, driver's licenses and graduated licenses are all determined by the province, health care, pharmacare, minimum wages, these are all set by the provincial government. And maybe one way to get people more focused on Ontario and not just taking it for granted is to remind people that it actually does affect them at ground level.
Well, again, here we go. We've got another survey here from Campaign Research on why young Ontarians in particular don't vote. So here we go. 61% of those aged 18 to 24 say they didn't vote because, here we go again, they weren't registered to vote. They didn't obviously talk to Martin, who would have told them, just show up with your ID and we'll get you through. 12% said they didn't have enough information on the parties and the candidates. Oh, I don't like this next one. 10% said they were too busy. Give me a break. You're 18 and you're too busy? Sorry. Am I allowed to say that out loud? 8% said they don't like politics. Okay, I get that. 6% said they don't trust politicians, which compares to 27% of 55 to 64-year-olds. 6% say the parties don't reflect their views and their opinions. 5%, very honest, said they couldn't be bothered. 4% said there is no variation among the parties. They're all the same. 4% say that. That compares to 24%, actually, of 55 to 64-year-olds who say they're all the same. And meanwhile, 65% of Ontario millennials believe that the legitimacy of a government is called into question if a majority of citizens doesn't vote. We're getting close to that right now. We're getting really, really close to that right now. What's your big takeaway from those numbers?
It's a complicated, I think my takeaway is there's a lot of nuance in this picture, and there's a lot of work in pulling it apart. So to pivot away from those numbers to Samara's, we've done research on a number of occasions to look at all the ways you can participate politically beyond voting. Look at a suite of different forms of participation, from things like waving a placard, doing online activism, to joining a party, attending a speech. And on every measure, young people are more likely to participate, with the one big exception, which is voting. So I think the first step is sort of put this issue in the right frame. The argument that this can be attributed to apathy just doesn't match the facts.
Right.
So it's a more complicated question of why is it that young people, while being perhaps the most engaged, are the least likely to vote, and it has something to do with the fact that young people don't see our electoral democracy, or are less likely to see our electoral democracy as the salient, relevant vehicle, their instrument for seeking the change that they want to pursue.
And that's what I don't get, Frederic, because you've got, clearly the government of Ontario today has offered free post-secondary education to students from low-income households. You would think that if you're, between 18 and 24, that would be of some interest. You have the NDP bringing out its platform, saying it's going to forgive interest on student debt, that kind of thing. These are two policies directly aimed at young people.
Yep.
apparently not significant enough to get them to go out and vote?
So I think there's a couple of things here. Youth is a lot more issue focused. They won't tend to abide by an entire party platform. They will get engaged. For example, if we talk about university fees and tuition fees. We've seen it in Quebec with the Maple Spring. Students went out in the street for that specific issue and actually ended up changing the government as a result of it. But they won't necessarily abide by the party who's been elected, all of its platform on all of its issues. They will go out, as was said earlier, and they will campaign and they will advocate for specific things. So that's one thing. The other thing too, and that's one thing that we see, is students are not necessarily aware of the history of voting rights. They're in a position right now where their parents, and oftentimes their grandparents and great-grandparents, had the right to vote. Except in cases where there's Indigenous or minority parents and grandparents.
Frederic, let me pick up on that, because I'm guessing Martin's and my folks ingrained in them that voting is a civic duty.
Yep.
Is that not the case anymore?
Not really. There's a bit of a taken for granted our democratic system. When you were born and raised into a country where voting or not voting doesn't really affect your quality of life, sometimes it's a bit hard to convince that, and also to vote for a party on a multitude of issues that maybe you don't understand, because your two main things could be education and environment. And those two policies, two different parties could have your preferred values on them. And so how do you make a decision into which candidate do I vote for?
I wonder how I'm going to ask you a real touchy-feely question here, Martin, because again, if I go to that survey, 12% said they didn't have enough information on the parties and the candidates. I mean, my goodness, man, you and I spend 12, 14 hours a day working to make sure that everybody, either on air, online, on print, wherever, has enough information upon which to make their decisions. How's that possible?
So let's unpack that. When you look at the data, it turns out that young people are more likely than older people to say they don't have enough information. That's what your poll showed. And that also correlates with not reading legacy media. Now, I'm not here to plug the Toronto Star or TVO, but there sometimes is a cost if you're taking all of your information from social media, which tends to be more fragmented, more atomized, and more focused on your individual interest, if it's the environment, let's say, and not on a global package. You know, there are other reasons. I accept Mike's point that young people can be very engaged and very passionate about certain issues, but it's tough when you cherry pick and say, I'm interested in a Facebook like or a protest or a placard, but I'm not going to vote because I'm too busy. Now, that option, that answer was given mostly by young people. Older people who are in their working lives gave that answer much less often than young people. So there's a bit of a hit there. Now, it may be that young people are especially endowed with better BS meters than old people, or maybe they're just more idealistic, and I understand that.
Better BS meters meaning if they can smell BS a long way away and they're not going to participate if they don't think there's authenticity.
They're more turned off by it, perhaps, than older people who are more accustomed to the compromises of their work lives, of political lives, and so on. But I think the civic duty component that Frederic was talking about is important. It's not as imbued with young people today in terms of the democratic process, the way, say, voting, the way, say, jury duty is, or, I don't know, military service or other elements might have been years ago.
If I could just jump in, I think it's also important to look at, if they're saying they don't have enough information, why are they saying that? Why are youth saying that? And one of the main reasons is because politics hasn't really been very accessible for a very long time. There's a lot of jargon. The NDP platform came out yesterday, and yes, they do have a summary on their website, but policy platforms are long 100-page documents. And if you are not as engaged in the political system, it's some of that language is just not accessible. So I think
but no one's obliging you to read the whole thing. I mean, go to the section that says Utes. Just read that part.
That's totally fair, but we are living in a world where information is increasingly in bite-sized pieces, just as Martin said, and I think it's on.
Oh, I got something on that.
Okay.
Hang on. Okay. Talking about bite-sized pieces. Hang on. RegCon knows where I'm going next. Because this guy brought all the party leaders and all the party wise guys together at Ryerson University for a very interesting conference. I guess it was a couple weeks ago, something like that, 2-3 weeks ago. And this, to me, I mean, the leaders of the parties were one thing. What David Hurley, who's running the Liberal campaign, had to say, I thought was absolutely fascinating, trying to capture the attention of the young voter in today's media age. Sheldon, go.
And here's my challenge as a campaigner, talking to young people, dealing with young people, is I've got a complicated story to tell about a lot of issues. It's a government that's been in office for 15 years. There's nothing simple about explaining what it's done. It's a complicated story. I'm told that young people consume all their information on this device. I'm told that they only watch 7 seconds of video, and I'm told that they do that with the sound off. And so I am trying to understand how I can tell a complicated story to people watching 7 seconds of no audio video.
I think Martin and I both spit our dentures out when we heard David say that, but if that's the bar, how in heaven's name do the parties jump over that bar?
Well, yeah, look, I mean, the digital public sphere brings its own set of problems. I think we're way past the point of that belief in the kind of emancipatory potential of social media. Everyone's going to talk to everyone else, and it's going to level the playing field information-wise. The reality is, it's hard to separate the signal from the noise, or from the broadcasting standpoint, it's hard to pierce through the noise and get your message out. I don't have an answer to that. I do know that when we ask young people, perhaps counterintuitively, we find that there is still a strong appetite for contact, the real kind. So we talk about digital natives, but it turns out that young people live in the real world too. And I think this goes to this question of information as well. We've also find that young people are dramatically less likely to have been contacted by parties or candidates during an election. And there is an appetite which isn't always satisfied. So yeah, we have to figure out how to use social media. I defer to comms experts on that one. But politicians also need to maintain other kinds of tools in the toolbox, things like youth councils. I think it's hard to communicate on Twitter. It's even harder to bring young people into a room and get them to engage in a kind of long-form way, but it's totally required.
Frederic, is that actually the way it is, that many, many young people are going to get their information about this upcoming election in 7-second bites on social media with the sound off?
Yes and no. It is true that that software such as Snapchat or Instagram are used thoroughly by youth. A lot of kids now in high school don't even have Facebook because their parents are on Facebook. So it's no longer
so it's not cool anymore.
Exactly, it's no longer the cool app.
Yeah.
But also I think parties need to stop underestimating youth. When things are explained clearly, youth understand. We do have, during our student vote program, we do a lot of all candidate forums where candidates go into schools and have a closed door, no media conversation straight with their young constituents. Because yes, those kids can't vote yet, but they can still hold their representatives accountable. They still live in those constituencies. And when kids open, for example, a Toronto Star or a National Post article that goes into details about a specific policy, but they don't understand the bigger picture, it needs to be explained. And those youth councils and forums and having that chance to connect directly and putting a face to something that can be quite theoretical has a lot of impact.
Sorry, Martin, let me just go to Lance on this. Don't be mad at me for asking this question, but do young people today have the attention span and or bandwidth to focus long enough on an article in a legacy media or something that they get sent to them on, what did you say, Snapchat or whatever it is, some other? Do they have the attention span for that kind of interest in politics today?
In my experience, yes, they do. I think that the youth today, they are a lot more informed than generations before them, and that's because of the access to social media. Because they have that access, they're able to get that information more quickly, and they're able to get a wider range of information. So I think the youth today are much more informed, and I think we should be giving them more credit for that.
Okay, Martin, you wanted to follow up.
Well, I'm not giving up on youth, first of all, and Lance maybe is a special case because he's written a couple of articles for the Toronto Star already, so he's unusual that way. He not only reads legacy media but writes for it. But I'm not giving up on youth because some of the research shows that the voting turnout correlates closely with educational attainment. And young people today are more educated, more overeducated than ever before. So that's a paradox, but again, it's an opportunity. And how do you reach them? One of the interesting things that we found in some research is that older people are much more sensitive to what they perceive as bias and partisanship in coverage. Young people don't care about the bias or the partisanship or the lack of objectivity, let's call it. So they're hungry for news. It has to be relevant, but I think young people, also immigrants, new Canadians for whom English might be a second language or for whom our political process might be unfamiliar, they all are crying out for more information. It is actually the top obstacle to voting, beyond this idea that they're not registered, which is usually wrong, as I say, but the lack of information and clarity on platforms is a challenge. And I agree that the policy platforms tend to be a little obscure sometimes. So it's not just the parties that have to do a better job, but we in the media.
Sahir, what about that? Do you think too much of this is too opaque for too many young people?
Most definitely, yeah. I mean, young people and immigrants, which is part of the population that Canadian Muslim Vote deals with. Like I said, when we did our research, we found that people wanted more information, and so that kind of gave us a reason to exist. And one of the things that we did in our 2015 campaign is we actually summarized the party platforms, and we disseminated that information to our constituency, our mailing list, our network, our community. Aside from that, we also now, because that was so successful and people really had an appetite and wanted to engage with that material, we actually summarized question period every single week to make it digestible and easy to understand. And I think that once that information is provided in a way that is, digestible, I keep using the same word, but people will engage. Chantal from the Toronto Star wrote in an article in 2016 after the election that empowerment and engagement go hand in hand. So when people know that their vote really makes a difference, then they're more likely to actually go and vote. And
okay, Mike, I wonder if part of it is, and I'm going to harken back to the NDP platform announcement because it just took place this week and it might maybe fresh in people's minds. If you think about the big highlights of that plan, you're talking about higher taxes on people making $220,000 a year or $300,000 a year. Well, that's not most 18 to 24-year-olds that I know. It's heavy on childcare and the new childcare plan they want to bring in. Again, not too many 18 to 24-year-olds are going to be focused on that. Martin, you were there at the announcement as well. There's a whole host of policy announcements that the party made, maybe one of which, the interest on student loans, that would be focused on young people. Is there just too much focused on older folks, and therefore that's why younger folks don't pay attention?
I think that's an element, and I also want to be cautious. I mean, it's true. I'm entering my mid-30s, and suddenly I look at platforms, and it's all for me. It's great. It's a very new experience. And so, yeah, and that's something we often hear, that young people feel their issues are neglected. At the same time, we also often hear that we shouldn't presume to know what it is that young people care about. Okay, so in other words, it's not just about tuition and marijuana.
Right. But
there's no such thing as
$1 billion to retrofit schools all over the province. If you're 18 to 24, you don't really care about that, do you?
Feels pretty remote.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That is one of the issues. I want to ask, Lance, since I think you're the youngest at the table here, there is a bill before the Ontario legislature right now to reduce the voting age from 18 to 16. And if they'd done that fast enough, you'd have been able to vote in June.
Yeah.
What do you think of that idea?
I think that's a great idea, and I support that idea. I actually wrote about that in the Toronto Star about 2 weeks ago.
I read it.
And I argued that lowering the voting age would actually see greater youth participation in our election. And again, I argued that because youth are so connected and they have access to such a great wealth of information, that if the voting age was lowered to 16, they would be more likely to participate in an election. So, we look to what's happening in the United States right now with the survivors of the Parkland shooting, and we're seeing, how this group of young people got together and, they're taking on the NRA, they're taking on the gun lobby, and they're actually making change and people are listening to them. And I think across the border here in Canada, we're seeing that too. So I think, if the voting age was lowered, we would see greater youth participation.
Frederica, I think part of it as well is that if the 16-year-olds, if we can get them in to vote, they may bring their parents along with them, and many parents of whom have stopped voting as well. Do you think that's possible?
I think the importance, whether it's 16 or 18, is that kids are able to cast an informed ballot. We want to move past the popularity vote of voting because your parents have been, for example, Tories for 30 years, and that's all you hear about in your household. But then when you start actually looking into your own values and your own perspectives, and you use tools such as the CBC's Vote Compass, or tools where you can actually go through a quiz that is non-partisan on the surface, and you can really see what your values are, you might notice that you would actually be voting for NDP if it wasn't for your family influence. So I don't think it's about necessarily lowering the voting age, but it's about reinforcing the structure around our youth to make sure that once they're legal and they're allowed to vote, that they can cast an informed ballot.
In which case, so it's not going to be 16 for this next election. It's just the bill's not going to get passed in time. In which case, tell us one thing civics is doing to try to make sure that more young people vote in the June election.
So we are running our student vote program, which is our flagship program. This will be our 12th election in Ontario. So we do a mock vote, basically, with kids ages 8 to 18, so grades 4 to 12. We provide teaching resources to accompany civics teachers, but social studies departments in general. And the day before the actual election day, the kids get to cast ballot for the real candidates that are running in their school's electoral district. And so they get to learn how to decipher a party platform. What are my values? How do those align with the different parties? How do I cast an informed ballot? And then, because there's two things, right? It's about learning what is our political system, how does our electoral system vote, how does my vote have an impact? But also, for teenagers, sometimes it can be embarrassing to go through a process that you don't understand. Going out there to a voting station when you've never been and your parents are also not voters can be very overwhelming.
It can be intimidating.
So if you've done it 5 or 6 times through student vote, for example, and you've done it in your classroom, you know what's a deputy returning officer, what's a poll clerk, what kind of ID you give. By the time you're 18, you have 6 elections under your belt. You're ready to do it.
Another idea is for parents to bring their kids into the voting booth. I mean, I do that. People talk about how parents should have control of sex education. I hear that all the time from opponents of the sex ed curriculum. Parents should take control of the democracy process as well and familiarize their children so that they get not just not intimidated by the process, but actually feel part of that civic spirit that can help people. I don't know that lowering the voting age is a panacea. I think Lance has demonstrated why a 17-year-old is certainly more than qualified to vote. But if you can also, to Frédéric's point, link it together with civics classes, maybe instead of having it in grade 9, have it in grade 10 or 11, and at the same time lower the voting age so they can go straight from the classroom into the voting booth when they are empowered and motivated, and make that connection when it's still relevant. And change it from civics, which sounds like physics, change it to democracy or activism or something like that, and make it exciting and empower the teachers as well, who often complain that they don't have enough resources to do the job.
Branding,
if I may, just in regards to parents, the trap sometimes is, I'm sure everyone at this table has been brought up in a family or a community that's been engaged. Having kids, the thing is you won't reach kids whose parents don't vote, because those parents are not going to bring their kid out to vote. And so that's where the community and where kids spend most time, which is at school, that's when this becomes important, because we hear all the time that students have conversations at the dinner table about politics for the first time ever, after doing a civics class and after learning about the political process. And those parents would have never brought their kids to a voting station because they don't vote themselves. And so that's the generational break we have to make sure that these kids actually go vote for the first time and bring their parents. With
just a couple of minutes to go, I've got to ask Mike about Australian sausage sizzles and what those are and whether we ought to try it here.
Sure. Well, at Australian elections, now they have compulsory voting, so everyone turns up anyways. And so as a consequence, what's happened is people open up sort of hot dog stands, in effect, outside of polls, and so everyone has fun and grabs a hot dog.
Like a tailgate.
It's tailgating the election. That's exactly what it is. Now, why reflect on sausage sizzles? There's an argument that voting here has become a little transactional and individual, as opposed to something social as it perhaps once was, going back to sort of our early period as an electoral democracy. Now it's sort of something you do on the way home. It's like picking up the dry cleaning or something. So there's the hypothesis if we can make it more of a festival, a social experience. In fact, there's some research evidence now to support this, that you can throw a nonpartisan election festival. There's research from the United States that you target it to a precinct, and that precinct sees marginally better turnout because it's fun, and it's also a way of generating a little bit of social pressure in a kind of sort of soft way. People see that other people, neighbors, are out and doing it. This is what's happening in the community. So that's something I'd pitch as a small thing, but cost-effective. It's not something we have to ask electoral commissions to do for us. You can rent the picnic table at your neighborhood park and throw a party.
As long as it's halal or kosher, right? Is that okay? Yeah, then we're on board? Okay. Martin, take the last 30 seconds here. Do you anticipate in the June election we're going to see more young people voting?
Yeah, the last time we saw a trigger, it was when Justin Trudeau pulled the low-hanging fruit off the shelf and gave us cannabis, and young people were energized. But you can't go to the next level of cocaine or heroin and do that trick again. The research shows that the biggest motivator is when people think it's an election of great consequence. And so that's why Alberta overtook us and left Ontario in last place, because they wanted to get rid of the Tory government there. And I think it may have been the reason for also the higher turnout against Stephen Harper. And we may see that again here. You have a government that's been in power for 15 years under Kathleen Wynne, the last several, and you have Doug Ford, who is a polarizing figure as well. So we may see that after all this worrying and finger wagging and figuring out how to move forward with sausage stunts and so on, that Doug Ford and Kathleen Wynne might do the trick just this once, just like cannabis did last time.
We shall see. Mr. Director, wide shot if you would, please, so we can thank all of our guests for coming from near and far to participate in tonight's discussion here on The Agenda. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.